everybody, and welcome to the Microsoft Technical Takeoff session on Frontline Device Management for Intune. My name is Jessica Yang, and I'm a Senior Product Manager on the Android Mobile Device Management team.
Hello everyone, my name is Saurabh Sarkar. I'm a Product Manager in Microsoft working on Microsoft Intune, and I'm based out of India.
Hello everyone, I'm Catarina Rodrigues. I'm a Product Manager for the Intune Customer Experience team, and I'm based out of Spain.
So today we are going to be talking about frontline worker device management in Intune. So we will start with understanding how Intune thinks about frontline workers and devices. Then we will talk about how to set up these devices. We will go over some of the features that Intune offers to enable frontline worker productivity. Then finally, we will put it all together using a couple of pretty simple example use cases of what it looks like in both Android and iOS devices. The goal for today's session is for everyone to walk away with better understanding of what Intune offers in the frontline worker device management space. So let's start with an overview and first understand how does Microsoft think about frontline workers. Our definition of frontline worker is someone who, regardless of their education or industry, works directly with customers or recipients of services. Essentially, in these situations, technology is really a supplementary tool, not the focus, and it's very critical that we enable just the right amount of technology to meet the frontline worker needs, but not overwhelm them or distract them with too many options. Around 80% of the global workforce is working in frontline, and thus by empowering them and enabling them, we can greatly increase their productivity. Now let's take an example of a couple of scenarios in which frontline workers are enabled using technology. If we take the example of healthcare industry, we can have a scenario where doctors during their shifts use hospital provided iPhones, which can be used for viewing the next appointment, patient's test results, etc. Or we can have a scenario where these are shared devices kept in ICU, where all the nurses in the shift use it to monitor the status and case history of critical patients and then accordingly act on them. Another scenario could be a retail industry where the store workers can use company provided iPads or tabs to check the inventory of items as per demand. Or the customers who are shopping groceries can use kiosk devices to scan items to speed up their checkout experience. Later in this session, we will show how using Intune we can cater to these scenarios and empower our frontline workers. In terms of types of devices, the common scenarios that we see having frontline worker use case involves single-use devices, multi-use devices, as well as kiosk devices. Irrespective of the device type, in all cases, these devices are going to provide access to information to ensure that customer interaction is seamless and enable some critical and niche job responsibilities that these frontline workers have. So let's take a look over all these device types one by one. So starting with single user device, an example would be a mobile device which is assigned to an employee. These devices are typically purchased by the organization, so they are corporate owned. Such devices are permanently assigned to an employee for the duration of their tenure at the organization. Usually there is some amount of personalization allowed in these devices depending upon the user's persona in terms of types of application and the functionality of device. For example, a mobile device which is assigned to a law enforcement officer who would use the single device throughout the day for a variety of different tasks. Next, we have multi-user task devices. These devices are again purchased by the organization. However, in this case, instead of one-on-one, we have one-to-many assignment between the devices and the frontline workers. So multiple people may be reusing the same device throughout a shift, and the device might be handed off between different roles in the organization. When the device is being used, the user can sign in and out of applications to access information that is relevant to them. On the right-hand side of the screen, we have an example of how one device can be used throughout the day between three different roles, where each user might need to sign in and out of different set of applications to perform different set of tasks that is relevant to their job. We will cover a lot of features specific to these types of shared devices later in the session. And finally, we have kiosk type devices, which are purchased by the organization and to be used in lockdown mode in a static or stationary scenario. These devices are usually used with apps that don't have a lot of identity requirement, and these apps tend to be for showing very specific and curated information. Example would be digital signage or a price checker in a grocery store. These apps usually show information that don't require user identity or login. Next, we want to discuss about Intune's relationship with frontline worker ecosystem. So as Intune, we talk and collaborate with customers, platform partner ecosystem owners, and OEMs to develop and enhance our FLW experience. So we partner with platform owners such as Google and Apple to design and build features together and offer better management solution for these scenarios. We also have partnership with OEMs and device manufacturers based on our common goal and strategies for device management. Some of them are listed on the screen right now. To ensure that we are prepared for all kinds of deployments, we invest in solutions that are based on both Android Management API Performance Stack as well as Android open source project. So until now, we have gotten quick overview to orient ourselves on different types of devices and scenarios for our frontline workers. Now we'll be seeing a bunch of demos on how to set up these devices and use them to enable our frontline worker productivity using Intune. I want to start off by talking about native management options that we get from the platform. We will be covering options with Android Enterprise, AOSP, and iPadOS. So let's start with Apple native solutions. Apple offers a solution called Shared iPad, which is our recommended solution for M365 on iPadOS. There are two sub-modes with this option. We have the regular Shared iPad mode as well as the Shared iPad mode with temporary session enabled. These both are platform-based solutions. They are configured with iOS and iPadOS automated device enrollment policies. Automated Device Enrollment Policies, or ADE, is Apple's corporate enrollment program, and in both the cases there is no user affinity, so the solutions are great for shared devices. First, let's talk about regular shared iPads. Shared iPad is really great when we have users in different roles who are using the same single shared device. In this case, there is a predefined user partition that is created in the device by the operating system. So there is user data separation between the partitions, and those are protected by users' personal pins enforced by the operating system. Each user gets their own application, data, web clips, and MDM payload. This feature requires managed Apple ID and is available on iPadOS 13.4 or later. Let's take a quick demo of how this looks. So here's my shared iPad and I have my first user signing in with the Apple ID. The user is going to be prompted to go through the setup as visible on the screen. Once the setup is done, the end user comes to the home screen. When we lock the device, it saves the session data, and now we have the switcher that lets us pick between other users. My second user now enters the passcode, and as you can see, after the second user logs in, the apps and data are completely different and separate from the first user. For example, for the second user, his Excel sheet from the previous session is still open. Once the second user is done with the work, and there is a sign out button at the bottom, which takes us back to the login screen. Now let's talk about a use case wherein not all the users need access to different set of applications. Let's discuss a scenario wherein all the frontline workers involved need access to the same set of applications, or if they don't have a managed Apple ID, which was a prerequisite in the previous scenario. In such cases, we can use what we call shared iPad with a temporary session. This is great for scenarios where every user sharing the device is using the same set of applications and have the same role. This also gives the flexibility to enroll the device without managed Apple ID or intra-ID federation. Essentially, the operating system here is creating a disposable temporary session for each user. And between users, all those app data and user data is going to be cleared from the device. This is available in iPad OS 13.4 and later, and enforceable on 14.5 and later. Now let's take a quick demo of how this looks like. So here is the first user who presses the home button to start the temporary session. The user signs into Microsoft apps in the device, in this case Teams. The sign-in is going to establish single sign-on across all supported applications using Entra SSO plugin. If the user now opens Outlook, the SSO experience kicks in. Single sign-on also works on Safari and web clips using the same plugin. When the user signs out using the bottom left key, all the user's app data from the session is going to get cleared. So the device is now ready for the second user. Again, the second user presses the home button to sign in and has a similar experience. This does not require manage Apple IDs. Now let's take a look over Android native solutions. As we can see on the screen, Intune offers a lot of management types on Android devices to meet the organizational needs. We have app protection policy, which can be used in both managed and unmanaged devices. Then we have device admin, which was a legacy methodology of enrollment and has been deprecated. And for BYOD scenarios, we have work profile. For frontline worker use case scenarios, we are typically going to use one of the enrollment modes, which are highlighted in the red box. So they are going to be corporate devices which are managed with or without user affiliation. We have various modes like fully managed and dedicated to choose from, depending upon our use case. In addition to Android Enterprise, which is a Google-based management offering, Intune also offers management for Android open source project-based devices, which do not go through Android Enterprise management. What this means is we get a really wide range of form factors on devices for different kinds of frontline worker use cases. For example, on the left side of the screen, we see devices which are managed using Android Enterprise, and these devices have more of a phone or a tablet-like form factor, which might be ruggedized. On the right side of the screen, we have some examples of devices that can be managed using Intune AOSP management, like VR headsets. And the list of AOSP supported devices with Intune is always growing based on the customer requests and feedbacks. In both cases, we get user-based and user-less enrollment management with support for configuration, compliance, certificate, Wi-Fi, and all the standard stuff. Now let's talk about a scenario where there is no native support for such kind of multi-user situation. Well, in that case, Entra Shared Device Mode comes in. Entra Shared Device Mode is a feature set that gives us a multi-user experience at an app level, even if the operating system itself doesn't provide that support. We get a single sign-in and sign-out experience across all supported applications in the device, and when we sign out from the apps or profile, we also get data cleanup. So for example, after completing their shift or when it's time to hand off the device to someone else, the frontline worker can sign out of one of the supported apps, and this will sign them out of all the applications that support this feature, and the device will be ready for the next frontline worker. Shared device mode also supports user-based conditional access, and you can get the single sign-in, sign-out experience by integrating with Microsoft Authentication Library, which is available to all app developers. This is available on both iOS and Android. Now I have Jessica from my team who is going to explain how we can increase the productivity of frontline workers using different features in Microsoft Intune.
Thank you so much, Saurabh. So Saurabh covered different ways that you can set up device enrollments in Intune. Now we're going to talk about ways of getting your frontline workers productive with those devices that you just set up. The first aspect of this is getting your frontline workers productive faster. And to this end, we talk about two features, device staging and enrollment time grouping. So the first feature set that I want to talk about is called device staging. And this is essentially a situation where you or a vendor will set up a device partially or stage the device. The device then gets handed off to allow the frontline worker to complete this setup. This helps you optimize frontline worker productivity and reduce setup costs by mitigating all that inconsistent user behavior that could happen during that initial enrollment phase. This is supported on Android Enterprise Fully Managed and Corporate-Owned Work Profile, as well as Apple iPhones or iPads that are enrolled with ADE. First, let's look at how device staging works on Apple devices. On Apple devices, device staging transitions ADE devices from not having user affinity to having that user affinity. The way that this is set up is that you would set up a VPP deployment for the company portal app, and then you have to configure and deploy a specific app configuration policy, which we cover more in documentation. That policy will target devices that do not have user affinity, and then when the user opens the company portal and signs in, that user becomes the primary user of the device. Likewise, on Android, device staging removes 10 to 15 steps that you no longer need to document and train users on. The way that it works on Android in this example is that when you're creating an enrollment profile, you'll see a new drop-down selection that lets you create what we call the staging enrollment token. Once this enrollment token is created, you can share that token with others, for example, another admin or a kitting vendor, and that will allow them to prep devices and send them through all of these enrollment flows to get the device ready for unboxing by the end user. Once your end user receives the device, they just unbox it and go through a couple of simple steps to set up the device. I have a demo in a second, but as you can see, there are a lot of steps that your frontline worker can skip because those are already handled earlier in the staging process. So let's look at a demo of what this is like. Here we have a device that has already gone through that staging process. So this is from the point that the frontline worker unboxes it. As you can see, all they have to do is turn on the device, open the company portal app, sign in with their credentials, and then that will kick off the device enrollment. The user is going to be prompted with any additional configurations you might have set up to keep the device secure. Once the user finishes that sign-in, basically they just have to keep hitting next to continue the process of setting up the device. And now this demo is in real time. So you can see right after closing the company portal, within a matter of seconds, all the apps that you've targeted to this user, they start flowing down to the device as well. Next, I want to talk about a feature called enrollment time grouping. Enrollment time grouping is a feature that we've introduced to try and address the problem of latency that happens when you have dynamically grouped devices that have a lot of policies and apps assigned to them. Typically, what happens in Intune without enrollment time grouping is that first your device enrolls, and then static security groups in Entra ID get populated. Policies and apps targeted to all devices get delivered, as well as policies targeted to user groups. Dynamic device groups are computed, and then finally, device-based policies and apps are delivered. So this is a lot of steps, and every single one of these steps introduces some amount of latency just because of the way services work. As a result, dynamically grouped devices might not be fully ready for a user for up to 6 to 8 hours post-enrollment. With enrollment time grouping, we basically skip all of those steps in the middle. What happens instead is that at the beginning, you assign devices to groups before the enrollment even happens. So you predefine which devices should go into which groups. After that, when the device enrolls, since that pre-assigned group is already pre-computed, the device-based policies and apps get delivered almost instantly to the device after enrollment. So this really greatly reduces that time between the device getting enrolled and it being ready for use. We're talking going from 6 to 8 hours to a couple of minutes. You can also even recategorize devices after that enrollment happens, so you can change the group that's assigned to the device at any point after the enrollment. And enrollment time grouping is currently available in a private preview on iOS, iPadOS, and the Android enrollment modes that you see on the screen. All right, so now we've talked about how to get your user to the point where the device is actually functional. Let's talk about the user experience that they're going to get on the device. I'll cover both Apple and Android policies, but I will be focusing a bit more on Android just because we offer some things that the native solution does not. So first, let's look at Apple devices. On iOS and iPadOS, you have a number of device configuration policies that let you really customize the user experience that your end user is going to get when they turn on the device. You can configure a custom home screen layout, you can show and hide specific apps, set a wallpaper on the device, and set a lock screen message so that your users see what you want them to see. On Android devices, you also have a couple of different options. So first, you could allow users to just use the default home screen that comes with the device, except that they only see deployed apps, system settings, and manage Google Play. This is the default experience for Android devices when you enroll them as corporate. Next, we have single app kiosk mode, which allows you to restrict the device to just one specific app. So this is great for focused use cases such as digital signs, kiosk, and other task-based devices. Finally, we have what we call the multi-app kiosk mode, which is only available with Microsoft Manage Home Screen. So now let's get into what exactly Manage Home Screen is. The Manage Home Screen is a launcher app that Intune offers, which lets you deliver a really predictable and consistent end-user experience, regardless of the device type or the manufacturer that you're using. So even if you have a fleet of devices from all kinds of different manufacturers with different screen sizes, you have tablets, you have mobile computers, they're all going to conform to the same user experience and policies once they enroll into your tenant. Manage Home Screen is available on Android Enterprise Dedicated as well as fully managed devices to give you options for how you want to set up those devices. I'm not going to read out everything on the screen here, but there are just really so many things that you can customize using the Manage Home Screen. You can set a uniform wallpaper, you can customize the app layout, you can configure the settings that users are allowed to access, and so this really reduces a lot of non-compliance security risks, as well as gives you a way of making sure that every single frontline worker is seeing the same thing. If you've been using the Manage Home Screen for a while, you'll actually notice that we have a user experience redesign that was rolled out last year to further simplify that frontline worker experience. So we did some user research, we talked to you and your end users to figure out what needed to change to make Manage Home Screen even simpler for frontline workers. We've made changes such as making the settings and sign out buttons even easier to find, as well as really making a lot of troubleshooting information and log upload tools instantly accessible as well. Finally, Manage Home Screen supports shared device mode, which we talked about earlier. And again, as a reminder, shared device mode gives you a lot more user-based features, but still in this multi-user context. For example, once you turn on shared device mode on Manage Home Screen, you get this sign-in screen where your frontline workers can sign in with their Microsoft Entra account, even without entering their domain. They can also perform other user features such as setting a local session pin, unlocking and resuming their own sessions, as well as automatically signing out if, for example, you have one person who forgot to sign out after their shift. So now let's look at a demo of what Manage Home Screen and Shared Device Mode look like together. First, let's dig into the admin experience for configuring Manage Home Screen. So we're going to make a new device restrictions profile for Android Enterprise devices. And then under our configuration settings, we're going to scroll all the way down to device experience. And then we'll select multi-app kiosk, which lets you configure Manage Home Screen. We can specify the apps that we want to be able to display there, configure Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, allow quick access to debug settings, as well as configure a kiosk dropout pin in case you need to access system settings. Now let's take a look at the device experience for a frontline worker on an Android enterprise that's using Manage Home Screen and Shared Device Mode. So our frontline worker is going to log in with their Entra ID and they can set up a session pin that's unique to their session before they log out. Once they're in there, you can see they have access to the settings that we've allowed them to access. And because of Shared Device Mode, they're automatically going to be signed into Teams and other apps that they need to use for their shift. Now I'm going to hand it off to Catarina to take us home. Catarina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jess. And now that we have our devices ready in the frontline, let's look at how we can keep them functioning and ready for use. Firstly, if our devices get lost, or worse, stolen, we can use the Find Lost Devices function to locate them. With this capability, you'll be able to see where the device is using Bing Maps, and then activate a Play Lost Device sound for devices without GPS or that are difficult to identify. This capability is available on iOS and Android Enterprise Dedicated. Then you're going to want to keep devices up to date, but most importantly, control how these updates apply to ensure that they are not triggered at inconvenient times in the middle of a worker's shift. Capabilities in this space vary by operating system and OEMs. In the Apple space with declarative device management, we can set a policy to allow updates only at a specific time, allowing us to choose a maintenance window. Now in Android, Intune supports integrations with Samsung Noxy Photo and Zebra Lifeguard over the air to prevent automatic updates, deploy the OS versions, and set conditions for updates. In the Samsung case, you'll need to go to Noxy Photo console that integrates directly with Intune and Entra groups. For Zebra devices, you can use in the Intune console the integration that is existing directly there. Now let's look at a demo in our Intune console of Android photo deployments. Here we are going to create a new deployment, and we are going to set a name to start with. We are going here to choose a custom release, and we can select the model that we want to update. Now we can select the Android OS version and the firmware version. We can also set the schedule that we want this deployment to run, and we can select the time zone, the start date and time, as well as the end date and time, defining our maintenance window. There are also options for installation schedule, but let's look at device conditions, where we can set the minimum battery level device must have for an update to occur. We can require the device to be connected to a charger, and we can define that the network must be Wi-Fi only. Lastly, we only have to assign this policy to a group, and create our deployment. Now let's look at remote help. Remote help is a remote assistance tool that allows IT to assist employees and troubleshoot devices remotely. It supports screen sharing as well as control, but most importantly, for frontline devices, we can use it for unattended control, even if the device is not being used. Remote help leverages role-based access controls, or RBAC, and Entra ID identification to keep sessions secure. There's also an audit trail to review all connections. This is currently available for Android Enterprise dedicated Samsung and Zebra devices, and it is included in Intune Suite. Now let's take a look at the demo. In the Intune console, we are going to choose the device we want to troubleshoot and remote into. And in the remote actions on the top, we are going to see a new action there for a new remote assistance session. This will help us to choose what type of session we want to initiate. And in this case, we are going to initiate an attendant control session. We are going to see that a remote help session is starting in our console. And this is going to take a couple of seconds, as on the device, we are going to have a timer just in case the device is being used by a worker at that moment in time. And now we are connected. On the corner bottom left, you're going to see the device we are connecting to, and we see that it is now locked. There are some buttons in the Intune console that you can use to activate the device again and see the screen. We are going to click on the menu button, and we see that the device activates. Now, we started this session because we had a report that Bluetooth wasn't working. We go to Bluetooth and we see that it is turned off. So now we can turn it on remotely and connect it to the device that we need. We can also perform other actions to troubleshoot issues on this device. And we have the possibility to see the home screen. Once we finish, we can lock the device again. And this doesn't end the session yet. So the session is still active. If a user now activates the device again, they are going to see a button indicating there is a remote session active and still running. They can click on that button to exit the remote help session, or we can leave it on the console. Now let's look at a relatively new feature, the remote apps and configuration, that helps to reset configuration and applications whenever needed. This is a capability that will uninstall those apps and configurations temporarily, allowing IT admins to restore them. This is supported currently on iOS and iPadOS and Android Enterprise corporate enrollment methods that are on the screen. Let's take a look at the demo and see how it works in practice. So in the Intune console, we are going to choose the device, and we are going to see a new remote action available, the remove apps and configuration action. Now we are going to add, and in this case, we want to remove an application that is giving us issues, the Contoso Employee Hub. We are going to trigger a removal, and we see here that it is now in progress. Once it is completed, we are going to see a green tick box show up saying that the status now is removed. On the device, we are going to see the application uninstalls. And now, if we go back to the Intune console, we can choose to restore it. And this will trigger an installation again. Now, seeing the device, we see that the app installs again and restores. So now that we have seen how we can enroll devices, configure user experience, and manage them while they are in the frontline, Let's see how we can put this all together. We have here a couple of examples of how you can use Intune technologies and features we have discussed today to enable the devices in the frontline. Let's look first at the retail example. Here we'll have a store associate that is using a Samsung S-Cover device. This device is going to be shared between multiple employees, sometimes during the same shift. These associates will need to process payments with an app that is going to be installed on this tablet, and they want to use it as a walkie-talkie so that they can communicate between them. It's very important for this retail store that no system updates happen during the peak holiday season of November and December, and that application updates only happen if the device is charging or has full power. For security measures, the device should only connect to the approved store network, and it should be relatively easy to get the device details such as serial number and support contact information in case they have an issue to report. So how can we achieve this and complete these requirements using the features we have seen today? We can enroll the device as Android Enterprise dedicated using shared device mode, which is going to enable it to be shared between multiple workers. Then using Intune, we can deploy applications, we can deploy the payment processing app that they need for payments, we can deploy teams and manage home screen to improve end-user experience. In terms of configuration, we can set a maintenance window for system updates. We can make sure that app updates are prioritized for when the device is charging, and we can configure an OEM config for the device to work as walkie-talkie. To ensure security, we restrict the device to connect only to the Wi-Fi of the store, and we can see all the relevant device details for support using Manage Home Screen. Now for our second scenario, let's look at a healthcare example of a patient that is using a device for entertainment as they go in for a prolonged treatment, such as dialysis. We know that these devices are going to be shared amongst different patients, so all data should be cleared between users. We also need clear hospital branding on those devices and some instructions to guide the patients. And again, for security measures, the device should only connect to the hospital Wi-Fi. So to achieve this, we can use automated device enrollment and set these devices as shared iPad with temporary session. This will clear all the data between users, and then we can use Intune to deploy applications such as browser, entertainment, games, and a patient self-service portal. We can also deploy device configuration to ensure there is a lock screen wallpaper with some hospital branding and some instructions for the patients. We can also configure home screen layout to display the applications in specific order. And lastly, we can restrict the device to connect only to the hospital Wi-Fi. In summary, the biggest takeaway we want you to have today is that Intune supports various frontline worker scenarios.
We saw how we can onboard devices to Intune to support those scenarios. We saw the support for various native enrollment options. We saw the support for Apple, Android Enterprise, and AOSP scenarios. And we also saw how we can enable shared device scenarios using shared iPad and intra-shared device mode.
Next, we looked at how to enable productivity on those devices by customizing your end-user experiences through native options as well as the Microsoft Manage home screen. Then we looked at how to get those frontline workers productive even faster with features such as device staging and enrollment time grouping.
Finally, we looked at how to manage these devices efficiently while they are in the frontline with find lost device and play lost device if the devices are lost, managing operating system updates, and when troubleshooting is needed, using remote help and remove apps and configuration. Thank you so much for watching.